Now we're going to be moving on to a topic which Tim and I particularly feel very passionate about, which is sustainability and the CDN. So can I just check that I've got Tim, Vinay and Mike online? Are you out there, folks?
I'm out here, Dom.
Excellent, Tim.
Yes.
Good. Cool. I hear voices. I will just cut away from my slide for a second just to introduce the topic. So sustainability in the CDN. Tim, this time last year, we penned an article slightly earlier than this because we were ready by CDS this time last year. We penned an article which we called Greening of Streaming for Streaming Media Magazine, and uncovered a whole wealth of discussion which hadn't at that point made it into the content delivery sort of vernacular and thought and mindset and so on. And I was really pleased that we found so much discussion about power in the infrastructure underpinning CDNs and so on. So over the last year, what are your thoughts about where we've come and what jumps to mind?
Well, I think two things jump to mind. One, first of all, we started that as sort of, we went to Eric and said, hey, let's do this because we think this is really important to the industry to understand that as we continue to ramp up, we need to be very cognizant of power consumption and those kinds of things. But secondly, what really has surprised me is the whole ESG movement. So the whole environmental sustainability governance from a public company standpoint. And so when you and I started having these conversations, we were talking about everything from data centers down to what I do with Help Me Stream, which is low power devices that we put out with renewable energy for NGOs. But the fact that it's caught on in the industry, not just for us, and I'd love to say that we're the reason for that, but to be honest, any public company is having to really sort of talk about what's its renewable energy strategy, et cetera. And that was why when Akamai approached us with some concepts for another article that came out, I think in the beginning of 2021, we said, hey, this makes sense to do a fireside chat.
Definitely. And we've had a lot of chats over the year. We actually penned together an informal forum, and I'm going to plug it several times because I'm hoping that some of the attendees and panelists who are joining us today will just come and sign up because we are starting to get a little bit of traction. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that right at the end of this session. But we've got greeningofstreaming.org, and I would like you all to take a second to dive over there and just join the forum. We'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. But I think at this point we should bring in our guests because they actually know a little bit more about what's really going on than we do. Before I do that, just one quick little thing. I did find quite an amusing little cartoon. I'm hoping that you can see that. I just thought it might provide a little light relief in the fireside chat. So, Mike, Vinay, are you out there? Can I just bring you to the camera? Mike.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Well done. How are you?
Yeah, really good. And Vinay, are you there too? Let's see your face.
Yep, you can see me, right?
Yes, brilliant, excellent, cool. We need to get the voice activation to bring it to the fore. So Mike and I had a great warm-up chat last week, and I think that neither of us really knew what we were going to be getting into when we started the conversation. By the end of the conversation, we were off the front of our seats. Mike had been messaging Vinay to get him to join the session as well. And I think there's a lot of synergy. You know, we can't have a conversation in a CDN conference about greening of streaming without talking to Akamai about what's really going on, because you probably have your fingers in the pie of what's really going on. So tell us a little bit about the sustainability issues you guys face and what challenges, particularly in the, you know, presumably in the traffic growth that you've seen over the last year. And so what are the things that have really become challenges for you? And tell us a little bit about how you're addressing them.
Yes, certainly. So I can kind of talk to the whole environmental and footprint side, and I'll let Vinay talk a little bit more about the efficiency side. But so we've been working a lot. We actually established goals back in 2015 in a more formal way, really focused on having an impact on how green our operations were and what we could potentially do to limit our impacts overall from an environmental perspective. With 4,200 locations across the globe and over 1,400 networks, definitely a bit of a challenge for us in figuring out how we can have those opportunities and how we can implement a strategy in all of these areas in an effective manner. So we've been at it pretty heavily over the last five years, looking at opportunities where we could bring in renewable energy, working with our partners on how we can have an impact specifically in the data center community and how to get a larger amount of renewable energy mixed into our operations. And then also understanding areas where we can become more efficient with our hardware and software, how we can serve bits in a more efficient ways, and also how to be able to serve our customers in a bit more of an efficient way as well. And Vinay, I don't know if you wanted to comment on that too, in some of those areas.
Sure. I mean, at a broad level, the two important things for me are to use less power as we continue to scale, and less power in terms of units of traffic, units of compute, or whatever that our customers care about. And the other side of it is to make sure that more and more of that power is coming from renewable sources. And so we've always been involved in that first bit, because using less resources has always been important to Akamai from a balance sheet perspective, especially back in the day. So I've been at Akamai for 21 years, a little longer, and for the first 5 or 6 of them, we weren't even profitable. So being more efficient was a direct line to actually being profitable. And so we've continued that work all along, and it's in fact, now I've come to the view that making things more efficient is harder than building new features and new capabilities. And it's it's innovation in a very different way. It's innovation at a different level. And so we are investing a lot in that now.
Brilliant. I'm going to come back to innovation right sort of just before we segue out towards the end. But one of the things that I found as we started speaking to people about this issue in the sector was there isn't really an industry-wide vernacular or lexicon. And one of the things that Tim and I have set out to do with greening of streaming, we actually spoke to a chap called Dan Sheen from Bristol University, who's got quite a lot of foresight on this, and also George Cameo at the IEA. One of the things that's complex is, as we start to see big public companies reporting on sustainability, the language isn't yet settled. We have different ways of measuring internally to how we might talk about that externally. Do you have any thoughts about this lexicon, about this vernacular? I think we are going to talk about that much more in the specific setting of greening of streaming. But I just wondered what sort of language you guys are using. People are talking about watts per frame or whatever it may be. What are the sort of terminologies that you're using in Akamai to measure your sustainability challenges and successes?
Yeah, and I mean, I think mainly, in a lot of the fronts and thinking about the efficiency side, looking at how much capacity that we can serve, I think, definitely focusing on the capacity side and understanding the overall efficiencies there and how we're able to do it better, especially in the areas in which we're deployed today. I think on the other front of that, we're very, very focused on the greenhouse gas emissions in the different areas, looking at things specifically focused and thinking of the IEA as an example, specifically focused on some more granular market-based emissions factors to be able to really kind of pull apart our overall emissions impact in these individual areas. Being in 4,200 locations and being across this kind of global spectrum, understanding that overall impact of the power that we're using and the ancillary services like cooling and UPS as an example, being able to factor those in and understanding the kind of the total impact really helps us measure, understand, and also factor into these overall emissions factors, right? I think the biggest piece of it here too, and understanding impact, really kind of focusing in on it and being able to measure it accurately as well, I think is of critical importance. So getting those mix of emissions factors from the IEA as an example, being able to factor those into your network operations and understanding what it's actually taking to actually serve that bit of traffic, right? What are the emissions behind it? What is the impact from it as well?
And Vinay, in terms of power in Akamai, one of the things we found is when we used to talk to CDNs about this, the problem was the finance directors or the operations director, or even one of their suppliers' problems, or even the supplier's finance director problem. And there was a real yes, it's something we've got to be responsible for, but it's really someone else's problem. There's a sense of passing the buck down the chain and so on. In Akamai, I presume you two own the problem, but how do you take control of the issues? How do you own the problem? Do you generate your own power in some of your data centers, or how do you manage your suppliers where you're buying power in from third parties? Where's the ownership lie? Vinay, I'd like to ask you that.
Okay, sure, sir. So first, a big part of this, like I said earlier, is that for us, it was never somebody else's problem, because making our servers more efficient mattered to our own bottom line all along. And so we've always had ownership of that piece, where we can look at concrete metrics like megabits served at peak per watt of power consumed, or the amount of scrap we are generating, things like that. Those were always in our control. And so we've tracked those all along. I'm sure Mike could show you data going back to 2002 or 3, when we really got into this. But as part of sort of taking ownership, we've gone out, so we don't actually generate any power ourselves. But when we are choosing suppliers, we are looking for suppliers that can meet our standards wherever possible. So as Mike said, we're in 4,200 locations. And in most of those cases, we are deployed in other people's networks. So I was listening into the previous panel a little bit, and Stefan, helped us deploy a lot inside Deutsche Telekom. We cannot bring our own power to locations like that. And so there we have to work with the network partners, or in neutral locations, work with the power suppliers to ensure that they have a path to sustainable energy that matches our own stated goals. And Mike, I think Mike talked about those goals with you previously in one of the articles that you mentioned, but we take those goals very seriously. And so we're working through the entire supply chain now for all of our vendors to see that these enable us to meet our stated goals for 2030.
And I want to add in real quick too, Vinay, I think one of the things that was fascinating in the most recent article was the fact that you all had partnered with other companies in the space, not other CDNs, but other companies that had high power consumption needs. And I'm in the southern part of Virginia. I know you all focus some in northern Virginia. We appreciate that because that alleviates the need for coal from down in our part of the state. But that, I think, was key, that it's not just taking ownership of the problem yourself, but working with other partners who need power to then be able to go find a power supplier that all of you together can go have a conversation with.
Right, absolutely. And we are by no means the largest consumer of power on the internet anymore. We thought we were 10 years ago, but we're definitely not anymore. And so we have to all sort of leverage our strength jointly to make that change happen, right? I mean, nobody's going to take Akamai seriously by itself in a lot of places, but working with these other companies, I think we can essentially change that landscape very quickly.
Very nice.
What do you guys think? I mean, one of the things that that I'm keen to explore with the community as we sort of raise this discussion is where we can be responsible. So I always like to cite the Earth Day Earth Definition Project, because I think the spirit of it's bang on. I like the idea that just because you can stream 16K 444 HD to your phone, should you be creating the demand on the infrastructure to do it? And conversely, one of the challenges that I think Dan put to me when I was talking to him about it was, just because you turn off, you opt into a lower bitrate stream on your phone, given the world of multi-tenant occupancy infrastructure, because you're not using it doesn't mean that the infrastructure is powered down. So where are we at in that cycle? What are the responsibilities that we can as architects and as sort of influencers on this ecosystem? Where are the opportunities for us to drive those changes?
So
yes,
I think sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Vinay. No.
I think there are a lot of opportunities here. And part of it, I agree with you that it is because we can do it, should we do it, has to be a key question we ask ourselves. And that comes in not just in terms of the quality that you are, or the bit rate that you are targeting, but even capabilities in terms of lower latencies, improved sort of security, improved sort of flexibility in terms of designing protocols. We need to be looking at all of these things to strike that balance, right? Because a new protocol that does something different has to do something different enough if it's going to use a lot more power. And we have to take all of that into account and look at it holistically to say, is this worth it or not? And there's just so many opportunities all the time. I mean, I was listening to the previous panel and about how you go deep to enable low latency compute or things like that. The power utilization or the power utilization profile is going to be very different at many small sites than a one big, well-powered, well-cooled site. And we need to understand really what we are getting into when we commit to a direction like that.
I mean, when Mike, we were talking last week when we had a sort of warm-up chat about concepts like pre-positioning content and so on. If you pre-position content so that the first user doesn't have a delay, you might end up driving 4,200 more pre-positioned caches waiting for that first user to hit them. If we lower the expectation of the users a little bit and said, actually, the first user might have to wait half a second or a second for that. It's quite a difficult thing for a CDN to be saying, well, we can deliver ultra low latency, but the first customer might have to wait. These are going to become strategic business decisions. And I wonder how much influence we can have as an industry on pushing back a little bit on people's expectations when we're actually actively marketing that we're better at fast.
I completely agree with you.
Yeah, it's complex. Mike, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right, Dom. I think having people wait even in that instance to be able to green things up and have that opportunity where we can have an impact or we have a reduced overall emissions impact or overall power impact, trying to pre-populate that content as well, right? I think there's a lot of opportunities there. I also think too, as you think of the impact of what it takes to get the content there and understand the overall power behind it, the cooling involved behind it, everything that's happening on the back end there are a lot of components that folks don't necessarily think about, right? I think of the BBC news magazine, dirty streaming, right? It was a very, very interesting topic where people don't necessarily understand, like, oh, this content is coming from all over the world to be served to your device. Like, what is the actual cause of that stream and how is that having an impact? If there are things that I think that we can do to be able to limit that, even if it is maybe limiting or coming up with an innovative way of being able to serve that content quicker and not having a delay, or maybe even having something in an on-demand format, right? Those are definitely ways where we're going to be able to limit our overall impacts here on our energy usage, and that's really the critical variable here is limiting energy usage in its entirety. So whether it's renewable or not, it's something that we should all be thinking about anyway.
But I would like to point out that off-peak use does have value. So if pre-positioning at 2 a.m. means that you don't have a spike at 7 p.m., which is probably the normal spike of traffic on the internet, you might actually come out ahead. So there is value. And you said it yourself, right? Just because no one's using it doesn't mean that the infrastructure is powered down. The cell phone towers, the backbone routers, everything is powered up and going all the time. And if we can utilize it off peak, there are cases where we come out ahead.
Well, and Dom's heard me speak about the work I did a decade ago with DOE policymaking around set-top boxes and the issues we faced there. Fundamentally, what I think is different here is, if you go back to the beginning of streaming, we had to pre-cache content for progressive downloads because we knew that if the consumer had the first 30 seconds or so, they could start watching and then it would hopefully catch up with them. Here, fundamentally, what we're saying is if we off-peak the positioning of the content, we may also be off-peak from the electrical consumption standpoint. So we're not putting as much load on the power grid at 2 a.m. as we would if we're trying to push it out at prime time at 6:35 for a 7 p.m. primetime show.
So Tim, you've got the Silicon session coming up in 10 minutes or so, and it was interesting last year. That was all about performance. This year, I think it's going to be dominantly about power, although I'm possibly putting words into people's mouths. And it's been interesting watching Google made several announcements over the last week in their core infrastructure. It seems that in-cloud hardware is back in vogue in a big way. I saw their new TPU V4 pods coming together, which are promising an exaflop of computing power, absolutely insane. And they also made some announcements about their video VCU video warehousing strategies and so on. Now, CDNs don't always, and maybe don't often, is even a stronger case, don't often actually transcode and deal with content versioning. Some do, some don't. That's it's a bit of a horses for courses thing. But certainly in Akamai's case, where, you know, what is going on in the hardware of your infrastructure, the way you see innovation? Because I have a strong sense that while the innovation in latency is going to be small increments now, codecs are making smaller and smaller increments in changes. But I do think that the big market that's going to explode in our space for innovation is in doing the same thing, but considerably more efficiently.
Absolutely.
What are you guys seeing that's coming into your infrastructure that's making the difference?
So we are at the early stages of trying things out in terms of FPGAs or ARM processors, or alternate processing infrastructures. So we've used FPGAs and GPUs for some very specific applications, but across the broad infrastructure, in the 4,000 or so locations that Mike mentions, we've stuck to general purpose CPUs for the most part. And even general purpose CPUs have come a long way. I mean, they're not, they have specialized hardware modules on board that can help you do encryption or decryption faster. There's some things you can do to help with image manipulations and things like that. So general purpose processors have come a long way. And one of the things that struck me like yesterday was that we used to do these big keynotes for Apple when Steve Jobs used to do them with the iPod and the iPhone and so on, and those used to be about 20 gigabits of traffic, online viewership for these things, and we used to use hundreds of machines to serve 20 gigabits of traffic.
Right
now, you could do that from one machine, right? And so we have come a long way in terms of general purpose compute. Of course, there's things you can do there with terms of offloading to the network card and things like that. So we do those. But we're looking at even more specialized hardware right now.
And how about the end of life of hardware and so on? Are you, Mike? We spoke about that a little bit last week as well. What sort of strategies are emerging? I think Tim's going to probably reach for the trigger and make some comments here as well. But Mike, tell us a little bit about what's been going through your mind with end of lifing.
Certainly. I mean, I think one of the major things, Don, is really figuring out how we can effectively recycle the hardware at the end of its useful life. One of the critical things for us is being able to reuse components whenever possible, being able to redeploy them. So being able to have a strategy there to be able to use hardware where again is definitely of top of mind first and foremost. I think at the end of that too, things that we're looking at on the e-waste side, being able to actually dispose of the hardware in a responsible way, and making sure that it has traceability, it's meeting standards, it's not ending up in a landfill. Those are things that are critically important to us, and something that we've taken a stance on, and we did very early on as well. We work globally mainly with eSteward certified facilities to make sure that the material have recycling, and any harmful waste, harmful chemicals are staying out of landfills, and the materials are getting reused and repurposed. And that's one of the major things too. I think on the design side, working with our suppliers to use the recycled streams like the aluminums and the frames and that type of thing. Definitely stuff that is of critical importance to us, and something that is definitely top of mind when we look to deal with our suppliers and our architecture and that type of thing in building all of this hardware.
Can I step in and say something here? So, obviously with Help Me Stream as a 501c3, what we're ultimately looking at is how do we put streaming into the hands of NGOs and emerging economies? It's actually expanded beyond that now to disaster areas. In fact, when I heard Elsa talk about the Caribbean and St. John and some of the issues there, and then rural communities. And what we've been asked is, why don't we actually just go out and buy brand new hardware and put those into solutions? There are two reasons. First of all, there is so much latent first world e-waste that can be repurposed. And we're talking old smartphones, old tablets, old laptops, old desktops, even some old servers, that what it gives us a chance to do is repackage those, repurpose them, and put them into a meaningful use in parts of the world that don't have access to broadband. Now, we build them as self-contained systems. We also build them to do only renewable energy, whether it's somebody riding a bicycle to generate power for it in a village, or whether it's solar. At the end of the day, we need to make sure our systems are bulletproof, because we won't be able to send text to those areas. Having said that, Mike, what you said about the frames, the aluminum, that kind of thing, that's also really key to us, because we find we might get in 10 different devices and we can create 2 really robust devices out of it through our research. But what do we do with the remainder of that? And I think that is absolutely critical from an end of life, that we figure that problem out.
Yeah, absolutely, Tim. I think it's critically important to understand how that material is being reused as well, right? I think in a lot of areas you can go and you can say, okay, I would like a certain percentage of recycled content in this. If the content increases at the end of the day too, looking at how the actual server manufacturers can implement it and use it, and then not only that, how they can craft different materials out of it. And not have to actually go back and say, okay, I need more natural resources, I need more content, I need more of these things. Those are critical areas, I think that we all can have an impact on from a technology perspective as well. Pushing for that more and incorporating the recycled materials into the hardware is super important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Vinay, I've got a kind of a question for you, especially as sort of in your position at the top of Akamai. There's going to be some crunch points now where we're going to have to make decisions where we could go chasing revenue, but it might not be sustainable. And we're going to need to engender public support, public buy-in into those things. That's going to be complicated, presumably, in terms of making sure that your shareholders understand that that's part of the value proposition. How are you going about sort of seeding the ground for that education and that process? It is a bit of a leading question, because I'm going to lead to finish on the green.
No, it's absolutely a challenging conversation, like you said. I will point out that we see it in both directions. So there are a lot of broadcasters and media companies that come to us because we're one of their suppliers, asking us, we need to meet their standards and their sustainability goals for the next 5 or 10 years if we are to be serving their traffic. So we see, from a revenue perspective, we see pressure from that side as well, that to get revenue, we need to become greener. But you're right, there are lots of countries, developing countries, even some parts of developed countries where we cannot be or meet the standards we have set for ourselves in other places. And I think that's going to be a balancing act every single time, where we will have to be able to, all the way to our CEO, just make that decision as to whether something is worth doing from a revenue perspective, even though it's not from a sustainability perspective, and what is a time frame by which we can get to the place we want, because we don't really want to be stuck in a place where we're not being sustainable and we're not making progress towards sustainability for too long. We have to set a time frame. We're doing this from a revenue perspective, but these are the steps that come immediately afterwards to get us out of this hole.
Brilliant. So listen, we're right up against time. I'm going to put my little plug in because I do want the audience who've taken an interest in this conversation to get involved in the discussion. It's very early days for this discussion. I've been really delighted to have Vinay and Mike join because they're key players in this sector, but we're trying to bring more of you out of the woodwork. I've seen Indra posting some really interesting stuff in the chat room, and I know you're out there. What we need is to hear your voices. Tim and I are naive to this. We're learning the language, we're understanding the space, and we can ask the silly and daft questions of experts like Mike and Vinay who've really got their hands on this. We've managed to talk to some key players around the industry, and the near-term ambition is to have a Zoom meeting of people who are interested in this. We're going to bring it together with hopefully academia starting us off to help come up with a lexicon and a vernacular that we can use to just talk about these issues on a level playing field, because at the end of the day with sustainability issues, everybody wins if any of us win. We have to work together with it. So what I'd really like to do is encourage you to go to the website, sign up, and at some point, hopefully in the next 4 to 6 weeks, I'll mail out to all the people who signed up. I think Mike, hopefully Vinay will come and join that conversation. We're going to have Dan from Bristol University. We're going to have George from the IEA, hopefully one of the other CDNs, and a couple of the actors on the next panel. There was a natural segue here to join us and continue the discussion. But for now, I'd like to massively thank Mike and Vinay for joining us and giving us a proper half hour on this subject today. So Mike, thank you. Vinay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you, Dom and Tim. Appreciate it.
Yeah, let's Dom highlight the point that Vinay said. Innovation efficiency is much harder than creating a new solution. It's trying to get it down to the point where it does more with less is one of those Herculean challenges that not just our industry, but every industry that's involved in moving around is trying to solve.